Namaskar students, today we'll be moving into the English lecture 17. We will be moving into one of the major theories of international relations, that is realism. And I've broken realism into parts because there's a lot of contributions and it has been the major school that is extremely important for us. And here we will be moving on to, in this lecture, we will be moving on from classical realism, where we'll deal with Thucydides, Machiavelli, Hobbes. Then we have neoclassical realism, E.H. Carr, Hans Morgenthau, Henry Kissinger. And then we have Reinhold Niebuhr as well. And neorealism, you have strategic realism of Sir Thomas Schelling, structural realism of Kenneth Waltz, and stability theory and hegemony by John Mershimier. These are the areas that we'll be dealing with in this thing. Basically, now what are the elements of realism? See, when we say realism and we have grouped so many thinkers together, what is the basis of their thought? The basis of their thought is first a very pessimistic view of human nature. They think human nature is very immoral, we are very selfish human beings, we are very crude, we are all the time only thinking about ourselves and not about others. Then a conviction that IR is necessarily conflictual, meaning war and conflicts are the basis of IR, and international conflicts are ultimately resolved by war. Like Clausewitz said, war is foreign policy by other means. A regard for the values of national security and state survival. A basic skepticism that there can be progress in IR, which is comparable to that of domestic political life. Excuse me. What is classical realism? They believe that the acquisition and possession of power and the deployment and uses of power are central preoccupations of political activity. International relations thus portrayed as power politics. See, power is one of the central ideas of the realists. It's seen as an arena of conflict and war between states, in which the same problems of defending the national interest and ensuring the survival of the state and the security of the people. Meaning we clearly understand that when we are seeing international relations from a realistic, that to a classical realist perspective, power is the central concept. And then struggle for power. That brings in what? Rivalry, conflict and war between states. And what is it you're defending? You're defending your national interest and the survival and the security of the state and the people. Who are the leading classical realists? What are their key ideas and arguments? The ancient Greek historian Thucydides. I will also do a separate lecture on the Indian concept of realism, where we will bring in the Arthashastra and other ancient Indian thinkers, which we will do separately, that is Kautilya. The Renaissance Italian political theorist Niccolo Machiavelli, and the 17th century English political and legal philosopher Thomas Hobbes. Thucydides is seen, this is Thucydides, is one of the greatest ancient historians. He is the father of history. He lived between 460 to 400 BC. He chronicled nearly 30 years of war and tension between Athens and Sparta. His history of the Peloponnesian War set a standard for scope, concision, and accuracy that makes it a defining text of the historical genre. Thucydides, he saw international relations as the inevitable competition and conflict between ancient Greek city-states and between Hellas, which together compose a cultural linguistic civilization known as Hellas, and neighboring non-Greek empires such as Macedonia and Persia. You had Darius the Great and others there in Persia. That is the Zoroastrian religion. They were the rulers. He considered the inequality of power as inevitable and natural. Great powers were Athens, Sparta, and the Persian Empire. Its naturalist character. Thucydides' brand of realism. Now, what is it that from Thucydides' work that is extraordinarily relevant even today? He says inequality is in the nature of things. The world is basically unequal. International order is unequal. Political animals are highly unequal in their power and capabilities to dominate others and to defend themselves. All states, large and small, must adopt to a given reality of unequal power and conduct themselves accordingly. If states do that, they will survive and perhaps even prosper. If states fail to do that, they will place themselves in jeopardy and may even be destroyed. So basically they say that states have to understand inequality of power, and the weaker states or the smaller states must understand and that the larger states are more powerful and accept their this inequality and act accordingly. Otherwise they will be destroyed. The Peloponnesian War. Thucydides emphasizes the limited choices and the restricted sphere of maneuver available to rulers in the conduct of foreign policy. Meaning when there is a war, the options that you have is very, very few. You have to make the best choice out of it. Decisions have consequences. Any decision you make will have consequences. For example, the decision of Nehru to think that China will have a peaceful rise was a mistake, and it is having consequences even until today. So the decision maker must think thoroughly. The ethics of caution and prudence in the conduct of foreign policy in a globally unequal world of restricted foreign policy choices, as well as the ever-present danger and opportunities. So what should be a leader, what to say, qualities a leader should possess? Foresight, prudence, caution, and judgment are the characteristic ethics of classical realism. Are at pains to distinguish between private morality and the principle of justice. Meaning they say that privately, this also Morgenthau stresses later. For example, he gives you the example of Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln may have been personally a very good Christian, extremely good human being. He won't even kill an insect. But when it came to the question of the unity of the integrity of the United States of America, which was divided on pro and anti-slavery, he was ready to go to war, because of which several thousands died, rather lakhs. So so you can't judge somebody from an individual morality. That's why there's a proverb: if you kill one, you're a murderer. If you kill several, you're a conqueror. Then, so it is this principle that is stressed. And Peloponnesian War, if you see, the Athenians offer the Medians an ultimatum: surrender and tribute to Athens or be destroyed. The Athenians do not waste time arguing over the morality of the situation, because with the power, might is right, or in their own words, the strong do what they want and the weak suffer what they must. The Melians argued that there are a neutral city and not an armed enemy. So Athens has no need to conquer them. The Athenians counter that if they accept Milos' neutrality and independence, they would look weak. Their subjects would think that they felt Milos alone because they were not strong enough to conquer it. The Melians argue that they will have the assistance of the gods because their position is morally just. The Athenians counter that The gods will not intervene because it is the natural order of things for the strong to dominate the weak. The Athenians expressed their shock at the Melians' lack of realism. They reiterate that there is no shame in submitting to a stronger enemy, especially one who is offering reasonable terms. Melians do not change their minds and politely dismiss the envoys. So what are the implications of this? Justice is of a special kind in IR. It's not equal treatment of all, because basically the world is unequal. It is about recognizing your location or your weakness, about knowing your place, and about adapting to the natural reality of unequal power. And an anarchy of separate states that have no real choice except to operate according to the principles and practices of power politics, in which security, survival, and self-help are the primary values and war is the final arbiter. Graham Tillett Allison, who is an American political scientist, in the book Destined for War, Allison uses this idiom of the Thucydides trap. Now, what is a Thucydides trap? Which, according to him, the theory that when one great power threatens to displace another, war is almost always the result. Allison's term follows the ancient text History of the Peloponnesian War, in which Thucydides wrote, "What made war inevitable was the growth of the Athenian power and the fear which this caused in Sparta." The term appeared in a paid opinion advertisement in the New York Times on April 6, 2017, on the occasion of US President Donald Trump's meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping, which stated both major players in the region share a moral obligation to steer away from the Thucydides trap. Allison asserts that circumstances at the start of World War I, involving British fears about Germany, the War of the Spanish Succession, and the 30 Years' War, involving French insecurity about the Habsburg empires of Spain and Austria, exhibit the trap. Both Allison's conception of the Thucydides trap and its applicability to US-Chinese relations have encountered heavy scholarly criticism. In March 2019, the Journal of Chinese Political Science dedicated a special issue to the topic, suggesting power transition narratives do appear to matter more than what is the perception. Now, the second major thinker we have is Machiavelli, Niccolo Machiavelli. All of you must have heard about him. He is the Renaissance thinker and he is Italian. He wrote the famous book, The Prince. He lived between 1469 to 1527 AD. He is a Florentine philosopher known primarily for his political ideas. His two most famous books are The Prince and The Discourses on Living, were published after his death. Now, basically, why does Machiavelli become very important? Because he says the theory of survival. Power is like the lion and deception is like the fox. And these are seen as the two essential means for foreign policy. The supreme political value is what? National freedom. The main responsibility of rulers is always to seek the advantages and to defend the interests of their state and thus ensure its survival. That requires strength. If a state is not strong, it will be a standing invitation for others to prey upon it. The ruler must therefore be a lion. That also requires cunning and, if necessary, ruthlessness in the pursuit of self-interest. The ruler must also be a fox. In the theory of the world, according to Machiavelli, is a very dangerous place and also a very opportunist place. Foreign policy must be based on the intelligent calculation of one's power and interests. as against the power and interests of rivals and competitors. Political responsibility flows in a very different vein from ordinary private morality. Foreign policy must be guided by security and the survival of the state. So basically, when we talk of realism, we say there are three main S's. It's a S cube, that is security, survival, and self-help. Now, what are the maxims of Machiavelli? He says, be aware of what is happening. You must know what is happening around you. You can't say that I did not. Do not wait. Do not wait for things to happen. What we have today, preemptive attack. Before your enemy strikes you, you strike them. Anticipate the motives and actions of others. You must have that foresight. Do not wait. Do not wait for others to act. Act before they do. The Prince. Machiavelli's best known book is The Prince, contains several maxims concerning politics. Instead of the more traditional target audience of a hereditary prince, it concentrates on the possibility of a new prince. To retain power, the hereditary prince must carefully balance the interests of the variety of institutions to which the people are accustomed. By contrast, a new prince has more difficult task in ruling. He must first stabilize his newfound power in order to build an enduring political structure. Machiavelli suggests that the social benefits of stability and security can be achieved in the face of moral corruption. Machiavelli believed that public and private morality have to be understood as two different things in order to rule well. Meaning, if you are a very moral person and you lose the state, or the survival of your state is at stake, or you make the state insecure, then you are not a successful ruler. So if you see literally, you have a proverb in English that tells you the path to hell is also paved with good intentions. The Prince. As a result, a ruler must be concerned not only with reputation, but also must be positively willing to act unscrupulously at the right times. Machiavelli believed as a ruler it was better to be widely feared than to be greatly loved. A loved ruler retains authority by obligation, while a feared ruler rules by the fear of punishment. As a theorist, Machiavelli emphasized the necessity for the methodical exercise of brute force or deceit, including extermination of entire noble families to head off any chance of a challenge to the prince's authority. Lorenzo, this is the prince he was talking about, Di Pero de Messi, to whom the final version of the Prince was dedicated. Fraud and deceit are held by Machiavelli as necessary for a prince to use. That means he has to be a lion and a fox at the same time. Violence may be necessary for the successful stabilization of power and introduction of new institutions. Force may be used to eliminate political rivals and to destroy resistant populations and to purge the community of other men strong enough of a character to rule, who will inevitably attempt to replace the ruler. So you have Machiavelli, who brings in extremely important ideas of realism which are extremely valid and relevant in today's world. The third thinker that we'll be talking about in this lecture will be Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes is from 1588 to 1679. Those of you who study political theory know him very well. Thomas Hobbes was an English philosopher, scientist and historian, best known for his political philosophy, especially as articulated in his masterpiece, Leviathan, 1651. In Hobbes' social contract, many trade liberty for safety. He brought in what is important for us today called the security dilemma. In Leviathan, Hobbes set out his doctrine of the foundation of states and legitimate governments and creating an objective science of morality. Much of the book is occupied with demonstrating the necessity of a strong central authority to avoid the evil of discord and civil war. Beginning from a mechanistic understanding of human beings and their passions, Hobbes postulates what life would be without government, a condition which he calls the state of nature. He is one of the social contractualists, most of you know, with Hobbes, Locke and Rousseau. Beginning from in that state, each person would have a right or license to everything in the world. This, Hobbes argues, would lead to a war of all against all. The description contains the best known passages in English philosophy, which describes the natural state of humankind would be in, were it not for the political community. In such a condition, what was the words that he used that most of us today quote, which is from the Leviathan? Continual fear and danger of violent death, and the life of man solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. The social contract that Hobbes brings about, Hobbes believes there is an escape route from the state of nature into a civilized human condition, and that is via the creation and maintenance of a sovereign state. Men and women paradoxically cooperate politically because of their fear of being hurt or killed by their neighbors. They are civilized by fear of death. Their mutual fear and insecurity drive them away from their natural condition, the war of all against all. They basically driven to institute a sovereign state not by their reason, but rather by their passion. Being secure and at peace, they are now free to prosper. So the security dilemma that we bring in, which is today very relevant in an anarchic world, is the achievement of personal security and domestic security through the creation of a state is necessarily accompanied by the condition of national and international insecurity that is rooted in the anarchy of the state system. The international state of nature is that it is a condition of actual or potential war. There can be no permanent or guaranteed peace between sovereign states, no international peace. International peace is an unrealizable dream and a dangerous illusion. Now the summary. The human condition is a condition of insecurity and conflict and must be addressed and dealt with. Meaning all human beings, if there's no state, would be insecure. And if they're insecure, they're ready to trade anything to have security. There is a body of political knowledge or wisdom to deal with the problem of security. Each of them tries to identify the keys to it. There is no final escape from this human condition, which is a permanent feature of human life. Now, what are the basic values? Thucydides gives us political fate, necessity and security, political survival, and safety. Machiavelli gives us political agility, opportunity and security, political survival, and civic virtue. Hobbes gives us political will, security dilemma, political survival, and peace and felicity. So realism, if you see clearly, these were the major thinkers. And in the 20th century, the person who becomes very important for us is the eminent British historian, Edward Carr, E.H. Carr or Edward Ted Carr, who wrote What is History, which is a very important text. And for us, the text that is extremely important here is the 20-year crisis, 1919 to 1939. Now, realism in this, Carr lived from 1892 to 1982. He was an English historian, diplomat, journalist, and international relations theorist, and an opponent of empiricism within historiography. Carr is best known for his 14-volume history of the Soviet Union from 1917 to 1929, for his writings on international relations, which I mentioned, the two major books that have greatly influenced us. He's a critical realist. Carr was a critical whose realism expressed critical consciousness, combining an anti-positivist epistemology, sensitivity to historical change with a rational emancipatory progress. His most famous book for us is The 20-Year Crisis, which was published in July 1939, which dealt with the subject of international relations between 1919 and 1939. In that book, Carr defended appeasement under the grounds that it was the only realistic policy option. At the time the book was published in the summer of 1939, Neville Chamberlain had adopted his containment policy towards Germany, Hitler's Germany, leading Carr to later ruefully comment that his book was dated even before it was published. In the spring and summer of 1939, Carr was very dubious about Chamberlain's guarantee of Polish independence on 31st March 1939. What are the main tenets or the ideas that Carr gives us? In the 20-Year Crisis, Carr divided thinkers on international relations into two schools, realists and the utopians. Reflecting his own delusion with the League of Nations, Carr attacked as utopians those like Norman Agnell who believed that a new and better international structure can be built around the League of Nations. In Carr's opinion, the entire international order constructed at Versailles was flawed, and the League was a helpless dream that could never do anything practical. Meaning about international organizations. Today also we have this argument about the United Nations. So at the time the organization was the League of Nations. In the same book, Carr described the opposition of realism and utopianism in international relations as a dialectic progress. Carr argued that in realism there is no moral dimension, and that what is successful is right and that what is unsuccessful is wrong. Carr contended that international relations was work in progress, incessant struggle between the economically have powers and economically disadvantageous have not powers. In this economic understanding of international relations, they have powers like the United States, Britain and France were inclined to avoid war because of their contented status, whereas have not powers like Germany, Italy and Japan were inclined towards war as they had nothing to lose. Carr defended the Munich Agreement as the overdue recognitions of changes in the balance of power. In the 20-Year Crisis, Carr was highly critical of Winston Churchill, whom Carr described as a mere opportunist interested only in power for himself. And if you see very clearly, this book is a great eye-opener for us because it was the first critique from the realist side of the utopians like Woodrow Wilson and Norman Agnell, who believed that international organizations and international law could maintain peace, and the Treaty of Versailles would stop us from going into a Second World War. But unfortunately, as most of us know, within 20 years, the world faced two mass-scale wars in the 20th century, World War I and World War II. World War II, especially by such ideologies as fascism and authoritarianism and dictatorships in Europe, highly educated societies supporting the scapegoating of a particular community and its genocide in concentration camps, which shocked the human conscience of the entire world order. And if you see after this, huge changes come in the international order, human rights debate, and the whole issue of humanitarian issues come into centrality into international relations, and whether countries or the international community can join together and intervene when people are being killed in a genocide or ethnic cleansing. Thank you. We finished this part, and next part 2, we will go into the next lecture of realism. Thank you so much. Pranam.